Hi, everyone, and welcome to Backstage with Actors Training Ground. I'm Tanner Lagaska. Today's guest is no stranger to the stage. In fact, he has performed all across the country, including the American Repertory Theater in Harvard, Repertory Theater of St. Louis, the Utah Shakespeare Company, and the Jiva Theater Center in New York. He replaced Anthony Rapp in Broadway's long-running hit Rent as Mark, the struggling filmmaker. He has been nominated for numerous awards for his work on stage, including Best Actor for Hamlet, Amadeus, and in the musical Curtains. Please welcome Jim Poulos. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, how's it going, Tanner?
It's going great. Thank you so much for taking time out for this. I'm so excited to have you on. I can't believe it has been 27 years since we've actually seen each other.
How dare you age me in such a way?
I know I aged you. Well, I aged me more, so there you go on that. We have something in common. We both were born in California on the northern side.
Yeah.
I believe you were in Marin. I was in Sonoma County. Did you find that living in Northern California affected what you would do as far as being an actor?
Yeah, I mean, I think, where you grow up definitely shapes who you are as a person in a lot of ways. Certainly as a raw,
Hmm.
instrument, you come in with, your point of view of growing up in that area. And that can range from anything, about how your family brought you up, about the community around you, culture, and whether you grew up around people that are pretty much look all the same as you do or don't. And I certainly grew up in a place where, it was very middle class, white.
Hmm.
And, so you bring with you that experience, and also any regionalisms, on a technical level, you bring in speech patterns, you bring in a personal look, what kind of clothes were
Right.
you wearing from that place,
Or the way you speak.
yeah,
You know,
absolutely. You
uh,
speak.
did you always want to be an actor, Jim? Or did you have
No, I didn't actually. I
aspirations?
always, my dream was to be a football player. And I grew up playing football in Pop Warner football since I was 8 years old. But basically by the time I hit high school, my godmother, Emily Gates, is the music teacher for both, in high school. And, but, she put me in my first musical when I was 8 years old, The Fiddler on the Roof.
Uh-huh.
One of the last kids to get, arranged for marriage, when
Oh,
that happened.
right.
And so that's really how the bug was formed. My mom, who was a communications major and did community theater, and my godmother, who was a music teacher and did the school musicals. And it was in my junior year of high school that Emily, Mrs. Gates, we call her, sat me down and said, hey, I think that you're actually very good at this theater thing and you should consider that as you're applying for colleges. And that was really the bug that sent me into the road of studying acting. I was a pretty aimless guy as a high schooler. I was really just looking for easy way outs, and I didn't really have any sense of direction. So somebody
Mm-hmm.
who planted that seed really got me going into something that I could be passionate about.
So, how many shows did you do outside of high school before you decided, you know what, maybe I will get training? Or did you go right out of high school?
Well, I went right out of high school. I had been taking voice lessons privately throughout junior high and high school, and I had been doing, youth theater outside of school, both during high school and junior high school. So I had been definitely involved in extracurricular theater and music activities,
Mhm.
throughout my junior high and high school years. But I went straight from high school to a school called United States International University in San Diego, where I kind of followed who I ended up marrying, my wife, Melissa Rain Anderson. She got her BFA there.
Uh-huh.
It was at the time the only school, one of the only schools in the country, definitely one of the only schools, maybe the only school in California that had a Bachelor of Fine Arts in musical theater.
Wow.
Barry Bostwick came out of there. Actually, Jamie Foxx went to school there. His name wasn't Jamie Foxx at the time, but that came out of. And Eric Kunze, who's an old friend of ours who's done a lot of, they had an incredible school of performing and visual arts there. And after a year there, the school went through some financial trouble and they were making cuts and stuff. So unfortunately, that meant I couldn't really complete my training. So that's when I went to PCPA. What was unique is that the way they did that training at USIU was in reverse of the way PCPA does it. So at USIU, they start with technique, and then they move to things that are more Meisner oriented or sense memory oriented,
Right.
or whereas or theater games oriented, and whereas PCPA does the opposite direction. You
Right.
start very much in a let's throw paint against the wall, let's get theater games movement and that kind of stuff, and then we switch to technique. So
Right. Let's break you down and then build you up again. Do you think that the training that you got at PCPA prepared you for what was going to be what now you have a career in acting? Do you think it prepared you to start it off?
absolutely, because the thing is about I think the thing is about training in any situation is that it prepared me, but you sometimes don't know which parts of it are the parts you needed at the time.
Mm-hmm.
The foundation of acting was imprinted in my soul. I didn't need to know. There was nothing I didn't know about that coming out of PCPA.
Right.
The technique and the rules of how to treat a script per project, that was really Charlie Bachman, God bless Charlie Bachman, who, gave us that. He had a very specific technique class, and he would talk about, when you have a period, you make it a statement. When you have a question, you make it a true question. When he had these technique aspects that I hadn't clocked as being a potentially crucial thing to remember along the way, because I was more of an instinctual actor who had good foundation and technique and language of the Shakespeare sort. But when you're doing a farce, you've got to follow the rules.
Right.
So when I worked with a guy named B.T. McNichol, who is a protege of Jerry Zaks, and an artistic director and producer and director in his own right as well, but that's where he came up. And then I got to work with Jerry Zaks. I learned these kind of hard set rules that you break, very at your peril. And those are the things about farce and how to handle lines and movement and dialogue in farce. So, and then I remembered Charlie. But it wasn't until I was thrown into the situation that I remembered I already knew that. I just forgot how important it was and when to use it.
Yeah, I think that, the one thing about acting is like with social media is that I find that we're getting farther and farther away from the use of language. And, acting is even more important now because we are keeping language alive. We're keeping the art of speaking present when we're on stage, in this vast world of social media now, where everything is basically, you type LOL and you do all the stuff, but there's not actually any more, like, I don't hear what you're saying. I'm interpreting what you're saying in my mind.
Yeah.
So in case anyone did not know, I went to school with Jim back in the day, and, tragedy had struck you. Unfortunately, your younger brother had passed away, and I remember the whole school was shocked by this as well as you. Everything went up in the air for us. And I know that you had a lot of support from us when you were back home.
Absolutely, yeah, I'll never forget that.
How did losing your brother affect you as an actor? What did it do to you as far as how you wanted to proceed moving forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was huge. I would say it was probably the single most defining moment in who I was as far as being a human being who had a personal experience with some kind of profound loss, profound grief. With Frankie, just so everybody sort of understands what it was a car accident. So it was extraordinarily sudden and unexpected, and he was only 18 years old. And I think for me personally, I was about, we had just become friends as adults,
Yeah.
and that was at a really exciting potential for us for the rest of our life, that we would be friends with each other as opposed to fighting siblings.
Right.
And so I think, part of my grief was feeling like that was taken from me.
Right.
But I think if I get specific to going back to PCPA, I was working on Angels in America right when I got back. And there is just something, when you're raw, when you're emotionally raw, um, that's a lesson. You can be, if you focus on who you're talking to, you know what you want, you know, you know the lines. You can talk to somebody, and you can be available for things to happen much more readily when you're already raw. You know,
Right. Right.
uh, so when you approach a role and you're already that raw emotionally
Hmm.
because of life. Um, Things come more readily to you in the moment when you're working with a scene partner.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of work, to let emotions come through because you're kind of riding on an edge anyway.
Right. Right.
So I think I was really proud of the work we did in Angels in America, and I was really proud of how available I was.
Yeah.
Of course, then when you get back into, the regular kind of day-to-day stuff of life, and, grief is kind of just gets spread out over time. You don't ever lose grief, but the space between those moments of grief typically get longer. And, so you as an actor have to find a way to shed yourself of those defenses, unless you're playing a defensive character, so that you are available,
Right.
when the time comes.
Yeah. And I agree. I think people don't understand the reason why acting is so hard. It's not the actual saying the words, it's allowing yourself to be emotionally open and ready and available and vulnerable to do what you need to do. And I think people don't realize that until they start studying acting. And then they're like,
Yeah,
oh, wait, I have to be truthful with my emotions. I have to actually express them. And all of a sudden it's like, ooh, that's scary. We don't really do that. So as an actor, we almost look for those moments when we are raw so we can learn from that and gain from that. It's almost like a healing thing for us. Like, oh my God, I was there, and it. And he's like, I felt it, and that's a wonderful,
yeah.
wonderful
Well,
thing.
and I think I think that's important on some level because you know a lot of the a lot of so-called important plays or plays that we love to watch. We're talking about big things that happen. We're talking about moments that are big and that are um, life-defining moments. That's often what
Mhm.
a lot of plays are about, right?
Right.
Um, of course, not all plays are that, and certainly not when you do film and TV, or particularly TV. There's another thing, a task you have to learn as an actor, which is how do you just do the everyday part of life and not make every little moment
A
um,
moment.
the most important moment in the world. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yes.
And what are the nuances of navigating, you know, the sometimes smaller moments? Now, of course, if you're in a comedy, um,
Right.
that is what makes it funny, is that you take the most insignificant things and make them the most important things, and you watch people flip out over things.
Right. Right.
It's all those little things. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too. Yeah. Think about it. If you made every moment an important moment, then all of a sudden those moments become irrelevant. We don't care anymore what happens because you haven't shown us what's important and what's not important.
That's right.
For those things. So
And I
uh,
think being available, like what we're talking about, it's not just about emotion, but it's also about being available to be surprised, to be
mhm,
surprised. You know,
yeah,
that sense of surprise and unknowingness, it brings gold.
yeah,
And theater, you're learning how to create an environment where that can happen in front of an audience. And of course, in film or TV, you're waiting for those moments to happen so they can capture it and put it in the final.
what advice do you have for actors who need to do it, the discipline, but haven't found a way to be their own person in charge of that? Because we always want the teacher to tell us to do it. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? How
yeah,
do we take charge of that so that we start instilling what's needed as us as an actor to get what we need to do?
I think ultimately, uh, if you're being really specific about what your intentions are as an artist, uh, and what you hope to create as an artist and what you hope to become as an artist. And I don't just mean that in a ethereal, like artistic sense. I mean also as a working artist, as a way to get jobs.
Mm-hmm.
If you invest in the specificity of that, then it will automatically create for you a sense of what needs to get done And if you can focus on those things that you can control, like working on your instrument, like, you know, looking at the auditions and pursuing them, although we're in a strange time right now, you know, I get that.
Right.
And of course, I would say the one thing that wasn't really alive and well when we were training, which is a really important part of coming up as an artist now, is generating your own work. That is an extraordinarily important thing right now, you know, or as they say, creating content, which drives me nuts. But, you know, what stories do you want to tell? And if you generate content that presents a person and an artist to people who hire, to people who make decisions that they want to work with. Because now I have somebody I'm working with who's going to act for me, but maybe they also write, or maybe they have story ideas. And now that it's, you're generating back into the mechanism, the world that tells stories. And you'll find, particularly in New York, there's a lot of hyphenates. You know, there's a lot of actors who write, there's a lot of actors who direct, there's a lot of actors who are doing several different things, and they're making great connections business-wise because they're not just coming hat in hand for a role. Yeah. So as far as discipline goes, I think it's specific to what you want to be. Some people don't want to do this for a living, even if they're getting training. You know, it's just not for everyone. But I think if your goal is to be the best you can be, then you won't have to think about the discipline so much. And if you're not working on your instrument or you're not doing this, then there's a good chance that's not actually your goal. You know, your goal is probably something else.
What has acting taught you, either about yourself or about life in general, like that you didn't think you would learn from acting itself?
On a basic level, just, you know, listening is hard sometimes. Yeah. But it's so important. And of course, listening actually requires being present with the person you're actually talking to.
Right.
And in acting, that is, you know, goes without saying, I think, but I'll say it. It's there are a few things as important as that. And that doesn't mean that you don't play a character who's not listening to the person on stage. But I think as a general rule, that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
And then I would say I learn things from every play I do. You know, whatever, you know, I learned something different from Hamlet than I did from working in Rent, than I did from working in Spamalot. You know, I get to do a lot of different kinds of genres. And so I get to learn a lot of different kinds of things from different kinds of people. And that's the other thing theater is about, people, right? You're always around really unique, creative people. And you learn a lot from that.
Definitely, I totally agree. Well, we're going to take a small break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about your time on Rent, and I want to find out all about the ins and outs of the audition and everything about it. So we'll be back after this small break with Jim Poulos.
At Actors Training Ground, we believe the foundation of great acting is quality training. Our goal is to teach the actor how to express emotions truthfully and honestly through connection to text, character, and movement. Many actors from Actors Training Ground have been signed by talent agents and featured in independent films, regional commercials, and national cable TV series. We can't promise fame and fortune, but we can guarantee comprehensive training from teachers passionate about the craft. So what are you waiting for? Visit us at actorstrainingground.com and see what we have to offer you. Actors Training Ground. Explore the possibilities.
And we're back with Jim Poulos. Jim, before we get into Rent, what did you do right after you left PCPA before you went into audition for Rent?
My first job that wasn't with PCPA summer company, so I did 3 summers with PCPA, was The Grapes of Wrath, which was in repertory with George M. Cohen's The Tavern. And so I played Al Jode in The Grapes of Wrath. This was at Sacramento Theater Company. And I got that job via a connection through Greg Coffin, who knew Tim O'Sell, who was directing The Grapes of Wrath. And then actually Rick Barber, who was our second-year acting teacher at PCPA, directed The Tavern. So that's definitely a part of training. You know, like you build a network with where you train, and you oftentimes end up working with people you trained with. You know, you share a vocabulary. It was definitely an extraordinary experience. That is still one of the top 5 shows I've ever worked on, The Grapes of Wrath. It was the Frank Galati adaptation, and it was just beautiful.
So you auditioned for Rent and you were cast, and an amazing opportunity, I'm sure. What was the audition process like? I'm sure it wasn't like anything you've done before.
It wasn't. It was, it was actually, it was in late September of '97. So they had been running for about, I guess that would be about a year and a half on Broadway if I got my dates right. Give or take. And then, of course, they had the off-Broadway run before they moved to Broadway. What had actually happened was I had auditioned for the show once before and sort of got an e-ticket for the next audition because I was supposed to have gotten a call back and I never did. And I showed them what I had, and they were like, "You never got called back?" And I was like, "No, I never got the call." They're like, "That's strange." And so there was sort of an express ride the second time I went in. It was an open call in Los Angeles. The national tour with Neil Patrick Harris was about to open in Los Angeles. They were desperate to find people in New York because several of the leads were either working on a film or were out with some kind of leave or vacation. And they had recently run an article in the New York Post, something to the effect of 8 men out and 7 men in, the understudies of Rent. So because when they went to re-review the show, they had seen a stage full of understudies. So the open call was, I literally sat in the line with my lawn chair and my book for a few hours. A couple of very young interns had me sing 8 bars a cappella, and I showed them the music that I had from the other audition. They're like, that's weird. Then I went to the next room. They asked me to sing a song for the packet. She said, you got that callback packet? You never got called back? I was like, no, I didn't. And I ended up in front of Bernie Telsey, and I believe Heidi Marshall was in that room, and I think she was definitely a big advocate for me. And I had a second callback, and in that second callback, it was just Bernie and CNN camera crew because they were doing a special on Bernie Telsey casting. So they were shooting Bernie from behind me while I was auditioning, and a few others, and they all, compilated that for CNN. And then I had one last callback, and that was for the creative team and choreographer, and Al and Nan Larson, I believe, were in the room as well because they were all there because the show was opening in LA. So that, I think, was the final audition was on a Friday. This all happened in the course of a week.
Wow.
That was a Friday, and that was in LA. And then we were going back to my parents' house in Marin, so we drove home. Saturday went by, and then we got a call on Sunday. And they said, we want to bring in the New York company. Can you come? And then Melissa and I looked at each other and said, are we going to move to New York, or are we just going to go do this job and see what happens? Because it was only a 2-month temporary contract at the time.
Oh.
So that we said, let's just do this, because we had wanted to move to New York, but it's just expensive, So we thought, this is a chance. So I did, and I was there for a week. I had some music rehearsals. I was not the top priority in getting people ready for the show, so I hadn't had any blocking rehearsals, but I sat in the balcony, and I asked if Melissa could too, because she tracked a character, and I tracked a character. I think Melissa tracked Mark, because that was going to be later, and I tracked the guy who I would go on for right away, which was Gordon and others. And after a week, they called me at 6:30 on a Tuesday and said, "You're on tonight for Gordon and Others." So I made my Broadway debut with no rehearsal on stage, except for a quick walkthrough at 7 o'clock.
Wow.
And that's actually when I met Sherry Renee Scott, who was playing Maureen at the time and had not been, who was on vacation. I believe on vacation, or I can't remember how it went, but she just got back. And so I hadn't met her yet. And we met each other on stage on a piece of blocking where we grab each other's hands. Somebody walks under our hand and we go into a clump freeze.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, "Hi, I'm Jim. Hi, I'm Sherry." Freeze.
That's funny.
Yeah.
What was it like opening a show for you, being a fresh thing, with actors who have been doing it already for a year and a half or longer?
It's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, I can't explain how strange it is to step out on stage and stand in that line and sing, 525,600 minutes. When you're singing Seasons of Love on the original stage with a little more than half of the original company intact, you feel it's very kind of out of body experience, because that's such a, that's history. That's a piece of history. So it was amazing. Of course, when you're backstage, you're not just getting this hit show, you're getting the history of what it is to be in a hit show and all of the interpersonal stuff that goes on.
Right.
Norbert Leo Butz was the double cover for Mark and Roger at the time and was waiting for his baby to be born. And Melissa and I walked into the Nederlander, and it's a very small backstage area at the Nederlander, very tight. And we'll never forget him walking in. And we had mutual friends, Norbert and I, but we hadn't met each other. And he was looking at the call board. He was like, "Who the hell is this Jim Poulos guy, and when is he getting here?" So it was crazy.
Oh my gosh. So you understudied Gordon. When did you take on the role of Mark?
So as a couple months went by, Anthony had to be out of the show for one reason or another, and Michael wanted to see me play the role. One of the times was really unfortunate. He was there because he's, Michael Price, really busy too. And when he's there, you want to be there and ready and do your thing. One of the times that he really wanted to see me go on for Mark, I had 102 fever and I couldn't get into the theater. And I was like, well, it's over now. They're never gonna, I was like, that was a good run, going back home. In any case, they got to see me do the role, and it would seem to be a good fit. Anthony was scheduled to leave January 5th, but his hometown of Chicago, and the first national tour was in Chicago. So he did a swap with Christian Anderson, who was playing Mark in Chicago. So they swapped for a month so that he could do it in his hometown before he left. And then I took over the role at the end of January of 1998, and I played it for 2.5 years.
A lot of actors, they always think that the pinnacle of the career is either a Broadway run show or an epic movie, blockbuster movie. Do you find that Broadway was a hindrance for your career, or was it a benefit for your career? Because, it's a double-edged sword.
It really can be. It's interesting because I really did come out of a regional theater background, and my hopes and aspirations were mostly about, I would hope to get a resident position at a resident theater company. Of course, those died out really quickly after we were done. So I would say ultimately, no, it did not hurt my career at all. And in some ways, and not the best of ways from other people's point of view, I would say, but from my point of view, it helps me because having that credit allowed me to take on roles that with my resume, I normally wouldn't have been able to take on. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't have taken that chance if there wasn't some sense of, I don't know what that is. There's some sense of sexiness about having a Broadway credit. It doesn't necessarily mean anything on a real world level, except that you were, you were chosen to do something on a very large level. So that does matter. But does that make me qualified to play Hamlet or Amadeus or non-musical theater roles? Not necessarily. So, how do you convince people that you're ready for something that's different than that? And Rent in particular had a reputation for being raw, untrained talent, even though that wasn't necessarily the case in most instances. That was the pitch, and that's how they sold it.
Wow. What was the most challenging role for you up to date so far for you?
That's tough. On just like a physical level, it was definitely Hamlet. It was just, it's a long, we did a cut, so it was only 3 hours long, but my performance schedule was pretty tough. It was sometimes a 9-show week. It was a 3-hour show. I had 2 student matinees, or a student matinee a week, which was, getting up at 9:30, performing at 9:30. On the weekend, it was, an 8 o'clock show, and then we would come back again and do a 4 o'clock and an 8:30, or a 4 o'clock and an 8. So I'd be down by 7, and I would have basically a half an hour until half hour, and then come back again on Sunday and do 2 more. So that was ultimately the hardest, like, overall role I've ever taken on. And I was surprised that it wasn't about my voice as much as it was about my body. And then otherwise, there's other things that, I just finished doing Henry VI at Utah Shakespeare Festival. And I started in part 1 in the outdoor, and then we did a combined 4-hour event, part 2 and part 3. And that was a really difficult role because he's considered ineffectual. So most of my instincts as an actor to get in there and create conflict, or to be the guy who cracks the joke, or to instigate anything, all of those tools are not really what Henry VI is about. So there was a lot of adjusting my normal go-to tactics for that role. And so that was really unique for me, and turned out to be very rewarding.
What advice would you give to someone, to a beginning actor who wants to memorize the lines first, with the intention already there, with the tactic already there?
I always say find ways to keep reading the play. Trick yourself. These things that we did in school where they said, write down everything the playwright says about you, write down everything your character says about someone else. Mm-hmm. It's all great, and it's all very useful to forming a character. But I think really what it does is that it just makes you read the play again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just read the play again. Now there are plenty of actors, like Meryl Streep is very famous for having like a photographic memory. Like, she reads it once and then she sets it down, I'm not like that. I need to stay in the script a lot. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really important to do before you start committing lines to memory, so to speak. Now, I had a huge breakthrough as an actor probably 10 years ago, where I learned to memorize lines by rote, meaning without any inflection. And I have several tricks I use to do that. And you really should
give us one of those tricks now, real quick. Give us one of those tricks.
One of the tricks I use is I would write it down. So I write down my line, and then I would look at that line and process it structurally, point of view wise. What is my character going for here? And then I would write it down again, the same line, and do the same process. Maybe try to discover something new there. And then I would write it down again. And then I would move to the next line. And I would do that same process. And when I would finish a beat of text after doing that, then I would go back and write them all out. And if I didn't make a mistake, then I would move on to the next beat. Mm. And I would just start to stack that process, and the repetition of that makes your brain work in a different way. I've also used like a line learner app where it's audio. You hear the cue, you speak it, you hear the cue, you speak it. I also use a flashcard app. I have a great app on my phone. I did this for Hamlet, where you can put the cue on one side and you put your line on the other side. You can swipe it left if you get it right. You can swipe it down if you get it wrong, or up, I forget which way. And then it only re-reviews with you the lines you got wrong in any particular deck of cards, Mm-hmm. So that is not necessarily at all what everybody in the world needs to do, but it's what I do. And it keeps me relaxed on stage, and it keeps me available, more importantly, in rehearsal for surprises to happen.
I always tell my students and other actors, I always say, every actor's process is different, and what works for one actor is not going to work for another actor. And if that's the case, just let that go and find what works, because
Right.
using a process that doesn't work for you because everyone's using it is not going to make you a better actor. It's going to make you frustrated because you can't do it, you
That's right.
know?
Yeah.
So maybe someone watching this is going to go, oh, wow, writing a line down, and I'm going to try that, you know?
I hope
You
so.
never,
It really, really helped me out. And I'll say now, what's really changed is rehearsal periods are way shorter than they used to be. There is very little time for everybody in the room to get what they need to get done by opening night,
mm-hmm,
or by first preview, or
yeah,
by first dress, you know.
right.
So I would strongly urge young actors that are developing the process to not ignore or neglect what an actual real life production schedule is now,
Mm-hmm.
and that you cater your process accordingly.
When did you join AEA? Was that for Rent?
Well, I actually got my first AEA offer to do A Christmas Carol as Peter Cratchit at Jiva Theater Center
Okay.
for the 97 production.
Okay.
But right after I had gotten that off, I had actually gotten, this is how it worked. Both Melissa and I were offered Bye Bye Birdie in the non-union national tour with Troy Donahue.
Wow.
And then right after that, we were offered our equity contracts to go to Jiva Theater Center to do A Christmas Carol. And we could do both contracts because the non-union one was offered first. So we could go do Christmas Carol and then go do the non-union tour after A Christmas Carol. And then we would still be equity when we were out. And then I got Rent right after that. And that was technically my first equity contract.
I know when I was growing up, one of my aspirations was to either be AEA or SAG. I got halfway there. But I mean, for me, it was more like an achievement. Like, you know, as an actor, I made it, you know, in a way. I'm in the union. But how concerned should an actor starting in the business, or even in the business for a while, but how concerned should they be about joining the union, either SAG or AEA?
There are young actors that are so impeccably skilled and so perfectly marketable that they should take their equity card immediately and go to New York and do their thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are actors who are so impeccably skilled and so in between whatever the market is that they will be eventually. Mm-hmm. They would be fools to get their equity card and go to New York right away. They should find a way to make money that isn't acting and work in regional theaters where it's true, where the casting possibilities are going to be broader for you, because you don't have everybody at your will when you're casting a regional theater. You're looking for the best people, and they're not always the most perfect person on a commercial level for the part. Mm-hmm. You can gain a resume of roles, particularly if you're a young actor, as non-equity. And then when you go to New York eventually, you won't have an empty resume. You'll have something that backs up your work, and you will have experience under your belt, mm-hmm. not just the resume. You have something gained as an artist. You know, I think the biggest concern when it comes to being union or non-union is, you know, on the one hand, you look at it from your own point of view, which is, well, I could get my health insurance, or I could get better pay, or I won't have to, you know, work so hard at getting auditions, or maybe not getting any auditions at all. There are things so that's from your point of view, right? But from the producer's point of view, what are we really asking? And that depends on what market you're in. Mm-hmm. If you're in New York and you're doing a Broadway show, there is no consideration. It's all equity actors. You have to be equity. And if they want you, they'll make you equity.
Right.
Okay. And then in regional theater, that's not the case. They can hire, some can, many can hire non-equity actors, particularly young actors will be non-equity actors. And you will work alongside equity actors and you will gain experience, like you said, and you'll have that sense of scheduling. But for the producer, that's a salary, and I don't have to pay into health and pension, and that's a big expense I don't have to do with that non-equity actor. So it's a give and take. But I worked as a non-equity actor for 5 years before I got my equity card, and I gained a lot out of that.
Well, we're going to take a small break, and then when we come back, we're going to finish up our interview with Jim Poulos.
At Actors Training Ground, we believe the foundation of great acting is quality training. Our goal is to teach the actor how to express emotions truthfully and honestly through connection to text, character, and movement. Many actors from Actors Training Ground have been signed by talent agents and featured in independent films, regional commercials, and national cable TV series. We can't promise fame and fortune, but we can guarantee comprehensive training from teachers passionate about the craft. So what are you waiting for? Visit us at actorstrainingground.com and see what we have to offer you. Actors Training Ground. Explore the possibilities.
And we're back with Jim Poulos. Jim, you did Hamlet for the Repertory Theater of St. Louis. The Repertory Theater of St. Louis is known for doing a lot of topical plays, things that deal with the moment now. And they're actually, even though it's 2017, they did something that really is relevant now about peace, Oslo. And I know that you were in that. For those who don't know the play, what is Oslo about?
Well, the Oslo Peace Accords, it's been a bit, so I got to get my head right. It was in 1993. It was a pretty well televised event, and are now kind of widely recognized as a peace accords that didn't actually work.
Right.
But what made it really unique was that Taya Rod Larson organized back-channel negotiations, aside from the official negotiations. Between the state of Israel and the PLO, and the Americans were involved in the official negotiations. But Taya Rod Larson had this model of negotiating that he thought would work, and ultimately it worked on some level. But because the world is the world, the brass tacks of it just. We know what it is now. There is no peace in the Middle East,
Right.
However, those people in the negotiating room have been friends forever, and their children are friends. So it's a very interesting play on that front. And it centers around the event itself. Mm-hmm. It also centers around the relationship between Taya and Mona. And this idea of don't stop trying.
Right.
The process is the process. The results don't always turn out the way we want to, but keep hope alive and focus on this idea of coming together, eating together. Mm-hmm. And that was his thing, communing together, then go into a room and speak your differences with each other and work it out. But if we don't commune like human beings, how can we see each other with any level of respect when it's time to make decisions and compromises, Yeah. It was unique for me because it was the first time I was working at the Repertory Theater St. Louis, and I wasn't being directed by Paul Barnes. I was being directed by Steve Wolf in what was his final production at the theater.
The show itself there's a little bit of humor in it, against a backdrop of tension and drama. There's a little bit of humor in there. So here is a clip from Oslo with Jim Poulos.
Just me to inform you that it is too early to say the ways of his grandfather. They say, that's fine, no problem, talk soon.
I gotta say, Jim, I've never, for the shows I had worked with you on in PCPA, I knew you did Rent as well. I've really never seen you do anything funny before, so it was kind of a nice refresher for me when I was
Right.
watching this to see some humor coming out. You have a couple of I think in the beginning of the trailer that you have this wonderful take you give to the audience. Let's talk about comedy. Comedy is hard. We know everyone says comedy is harder than drama. The question though is, how do you create a believable moment to make it that becomes funny in a drama without highlighting the fact that, hey, I'm being funny now?
Well, that's all about intention and specificity. And usually you're taking a cue from the playwright. You know, even dramatic playwrights want to make sure their jokes land, so to speak. And so, yeah, it's delicate. You got to be able to do it in a way that's not like a sitcom. But mostly it's about generating tension and releasing it. And I think, you know, moving the play. I think Jerry Zaks used to say, don't stop the play until the play stops you, or don't stop the play until the audience stops you. So there's other, you know, some people take a different route. They tell the audience what's funny, and then they allow the audience to tell you whether it's not funny, and they adjust accordingly. So you got to work very closely with your director on things like that to make sure you're tonally in the right world, and then you just take your cue from, I think, the writer, you know.
Yeah. What was one of your favorite roles to do?
I loved doing Spam-A-Lot because I was a huge fan of Monty Python and the Holy Grail when I was a kid. And that's a really fun role. It was the David Hyde Pierce role in the original. And it's a blast. And it's silly, just, you know, outright silliness.
Right.
I love doing A Christmas Carol every year with, and that's one that my wife directs, Melissa, at the Denver Center. And it's a beautiful production, and it's, you know, it's sold out every night. And, I don't know, it's just I get to play Fred in that, and a couple other characters. And then, you know, one of the most rewarding things I ever did was this piece called All Is Calm. And that was in the small space at Alabama Shakespeare Festival. It was completely a cappella sung theater piece about the Christmas truce that happened between the British soldiers and the German soldiers during World War I.
What are some common mistakes that you think beginning actors make that they shouldn't?
You know, take the note. Take the effing note. That's usually the biggest one I see. Just take the note.
Just say thank you.
Thank you. And you know, it can be really sensitive. Even saying thank you, if your tone isn't right, can sound, you know, yeah. Sometimes just a nod or just write it down. You know what will earn a director's respect quicker than almost anything is if you get a note, and the very next time that opportunity comes to show them that you have assimilated that note into your work, you do it.
Yeah.
Now of course there are honest mistakes. There are things where you think you've taken the note and you haven't, and that's a discussion, but that's usually pretty apparent to a director, you know, that you made something, you made a choice. It wasn't exactly what you were hoping for, but at least you heard that wasn't working and you made a decision. What I see in young actors is that they literally just come back and do the exact same thing as if the director's notes were something that could be assimilated at their own discretion.
Right.
And on their own time.
What should an actor always remember?
Well, that's hard. You know, the first thing that came to my mind was it's not about you. You know, it's not always about you. It's usually never about you. It's about the moment at hand, and, you know, when you're working to build a character, you know, you're building something that is in response to outside forces, you know, even if it's a soliloquy, you're looking for, you know, something to respond to outside yourself. Even though it's an internal process in theater, you're looking for something out there to have a conversation with, even if it's yourself, you know.
Right.
So in all respects, I think, you know, think about be prepared and just remember it's not about you.
You've done a lot of shows. Have you ever not gotten a role that you auditioned for? What do you do when a role you really wanted didn't come through?
It really depends on my life at the time. You know, I think I can't really clock a particular role that like devastated me that I didn't get it. I think it's hard to negotiate constant no's.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, um, and I think for me, it's always been more about, do I have any work at all? Not necessarily, am I getting the roles I really hoped and dreamed about?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I've had a pretty good run throughout, and I definitely had some low points, you know, where I had even lost my insurance. And I certainly had to pick up a side hustle along the way, which was web design, which is actually proven to be extraordinarily useful right now in these, you know, COVID times,
Mm-hmm.
because I now have a remote full-time job as a web developer, WordPress web developer,
Wow.
which has been really, you know, a godsend.
Yeah.
So rejections, I think, directly related to whatever your point of view is at the time. You know, if your life is good in other respects, you can handle rejection better, I think.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's different for everyone, you know, but you definitely got to get used to hearing no.
What should actors do during this time of not being able to audition, not being able to perform? They don't have a side hustle. Their hustle is their acting. What can they do to stay honed and ready for when theater suddenly, poof, opens up again?
There's a lot of value in not worrying about honing your skills and, you know, filling the well, you know, read books, paint, write songs. That's what I started doing. I just started writing songs based on Shakespeare lyrics. I'm not an excellent guitar player by any means, but I do like to write songs. And that's probably more important in my point of view than staying sharp.
Right.
I guess the other thing that you can definitely do, and a lot of people are doing, is up your game on self-tape skills and self-tape equipment and setups. And, you know, I know actors who are painting a wall so that they don't have to worry about a drop. Get a ring light or something, some kind of lighting, so that you can control the light regardless of what's going on outside. Practice taping.
Yeah.
You know, why not, right? Audiobooks are going to be a bigger deal now. Doing theater for audiobooks will be a thing. There's another skill you can work on, is how, you know, recording yourself on tape, telling a story with only your voice.
If you knew then what you know now, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
Get out. No, I hate that answer, but, you know, these are tough times right now. And I'm not going to lie. It's hard to be encouraging about getting into this business at this moment in time. There are artists of all walks right now who have been solely making their living by what they do.
Right.
I've never had to get a side hustle like I did. And all at once, it has been taken away. And I can't tell you how unsettling that is for a lot of my friends and for a lot of my colleagues.
Yeah.
So you just got to know that that's not necessarily unique to acting, but it is a very specific world we're talking about, the performing arts. And, you know, whereas if you're a marketing agency, you know, you can survive. You can work remotely. If you're an investment firm, well, all of the trades are being done online anyway these days. If you are, you know, most everything can be done electronically these days. It takes away a group dynamic, you know, a team dynamic sometimes. But the actual world of doing theater and TV and film is about people being close to each other. Having said that, theater has been around since the beginning of time, and it will be around after COVID. And so if you're a young artist and that's what you love and what you want to do, then hang in there. It's going to come back.
So we are at the portion of the show where I am doing a little tribute to James Lipton from inside the Actors Studio. He would end his interview with questions from Bevo. And so I sort of took some of those questions, added some of my own little hybrid of my own 10 questions. Here we go. Question number 1. What is your favorite sound?
Melissa's laugh.
And what is your least favorite sound?
Chinese opera.
What scares you?
Recently, I have had a fear of heights. Like when I was at the Grand Canyon and looking into that abyss, I was getting a real sense of I'm going to fall into there.
What brings you joy?
I mean, Melissa, and music, and so many things. Family, theater, community.
What is your favorite swear word?
Fuck.
What other profession would you like to attempt?
Lighting designer.
If anything, what is your biggest regret?
My biggest regret is that I didn't get to know my brother before he died.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you consider your strongest trait?
Loyalty.
And what do you consider your weakest trait?
Short fuse, maybe.
And then finally, what do you want to be remembered for?
Being a passionate, compassionate human.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I do appreciate it. It's been so much fun. I must say, I learned so much about you.
It's been great to be here, Tanner. It's really good to kind of catch up again.
Yes, it was very nice. I wish you the best with everything, and hopefully we will see you on stage soon once this whole pandemic has left us. Anyway, this has been Backstage with Actors Training Ground. I'm Tanner Lagaska. Until next time, explore the possibilities.